For more, let's bring in Nicholas Wu. Nicholas is congressional reporter for Politico. Hey, Nicholas, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. So you were at today's hearing. Can you tell us what more we learned about how the former president and his allies were pressuring these state officials to overturn the 2020 presidential election?
What the committee tried to lay out in their presentation today was how this was a widespread effort by the former president and his allies to lean on state election officials and legislatures to try to get them to overturn the results of the election. Whether that was Trump and his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, calling the Arizona State House Speaker, Rusty Bowers, to try to get him to have the Arizona State Legislature appoint its own electors, or directly asking the Georgia Secretary of State to find enough ballots to tip the election in his favor. This was all part and parcel of this months-long campaign to try to alter the results of the election here.
Yeah, and that was kind of the focus from Congressman Adam Schiff today. He illustrated what he said were efforts to essentially pressure these state officials. Take a listen.
He tried to stop state legislatures and governors from certifying the results of the election. He went to court and filed dozens of frivolous lawsuits, making unsubstantiated claims of fraud. When that too failed, he mounted a pressure campaign directed at individual state legislators.
So what more did we learn? What more did the committee lay out about this pressure campaign?
For example, we saw how the Pennsylvania State House Speaker, Brian Cutler, talked about how his phone number had been tweeted out by the president. And as a result, he got all of these calls from people asking him to try to overturn the election. The same went for the Michigan State Senate leader, Mike Shirkey, who also talked about how he was getting these thousands of messages from Trump supporters asking him to appoint an alternate slate of electors in Michigan through the legislature, something that was not seen by any of these folks as a legally viable plan.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to see kind of the breadth of attempts. We've heard so much about Georgia and the phone call, of course, with Brad Raffensperger, but hearing what was attempted in Arizona and all of these other states and how close the former president and his allies kind of got to this, notwithstanding those in power who were able to stand their ground. But going back to Georgia and Raffensperger, I mean, we all remember the infamous phone call where Trump asked him to find the votes. Raffensperger was at the hearing today testifying. What did we learn from his testimony? What did it entail, essentially?
Much of what Raffensperger was asked about was, yes, this phone call that we've heard so much about already. But now we got to actually hear it from the man himself live, rather than these snippets of the recording that we've heard over and over and over. Raffensperger said today, there was no place for him to go and find more votes because there wasn't a way for him to try to tip the election to Trump. They stood by their results, and so he and his deputy, Gabe Sterling, who was also in the room today, quite vigorously defended the integrity of the Georgia election results.
Really important point that all of these men were under oath, so hearing it directly from them. And also to point out that these are all Republicans appearing before this committee on this particular panel. Just a good reminder that as much as this committee is derided as partisan, we are hearing from a lot of Republican officials saying that the former president just was making things up. But Nicholas, since you cover the Hill, I also want to ask you about some other news up on the Hill today, that the Senate is actually moving closer to a gun reform deal. What have you heard about those developments? What more can you tell us?
Well, what we're waiting for now is the actual text of this deal. We've been hearing all day that this might be coming, but this is where things really start to get tricky with these kinds of negotiations as we actually try to put pen to paper and resolve, what was this kind of broadly agreed upon framework between these different legislators into something that can become law. Now, the question is, can this compromise that the Senate comes up with be something that could pass the House as well, especially if there's the potential that some progressive House Democrats might not like provisions of this legislation, depending on what it ends up saying about potential policing in schools, for example.
And whether they can get something together and get a vote before they head out on recess for the July 4th break. Nicholas Wu, thank you for covering both chambers of Congress for us today. We appreciate it.